We're going to talk about the end of the Idaho legislative session. It's done. Thankfully, they finally have pulled the plug on this year's session. And now the question arises, okay, how did my representative or how did my state senator do in terms of, their representation of the voting public? Now, some people really don't care, right? We outsource it to them because that's their job, and then I don't have to worry about it, and I can do the fun stuff in life while they worry about the details. But it's important. In fact, it's more important than we think that those who represent us not only tell us what a great job they're going to do, but that they actually back it up with their actions. So we're going to break it down. What does it mean to operate within the bounds of good government, to be a responsible representative of the people? We'll talk about it in just a few moments.
Bias, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Once again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. Sometimes it's hard to tell when the person who is representing you in the state legislature, be it your area representative or your state senator, when they're actually doing the job that they agreed to do when they were elected. Now, politicians run on promises, and I've said before and I'll reiterate, politicians are known for saying whatever it takes to get elected and then doing whatever it takes to stay in power once they're there. And for many of them, that temptation can be more than they can resist when it comes to engaging in amoral practices. But what if there were a way to measure whether or not they are doing a proper job of representing those that they claim to represent, as opposed to special interests, cronies, things like that? See, there's a lot of talk, and this is particularly being directed toward organizations like the Idaho Freedom Foundation that, really all they're about is they're just trying to implement the desires of their dark money funders. And it's, that's kind of a catchphrase that's supposed to sound scary without actually defining what it means. Dark money. Oh, if it's dark, it must be so scary. It's so evil, it can't stand the light of day. But there's actually a very simple way to break it down by the numbers and to tell, is a certain piece of policy within the proper scope of government or not? Is it consistent with the principles of good government? And I'm going to just come right out and tell you, I'm using the term good government synonymous with conservative government because that's really what it's based upon. It's based on the inalienable rights of the individual. Government exists for the purpose of protecting those rights and ensuring that nobody is exploiting or plundering the public for their own pet projects. And believe it or not, the Idaho Freedom Foundation, for all the heat that they take, has a very reasonable way of a yardstick, if you will, of measuring whether or not a representative is living up to those standards. Now, critics will say, well, it's just this arbitrary thing, whoever's in charge of the IFF is about, that's what it's about. But I'm going to share with you a 12-point matrix that gives them a very solid way to measure whether or not someone is doing the job that they intended. This is the Idaho Freedom Index rating metric. It's good news for those who are governed well. Those who don't, well, they tend to have a problem with that. And hence with the Idaho Freedom Foundation, they tend to be the ones who will accuse the Idaho Freedom Foundation of being engaged in extremism. So as I share these with you, I would encourage you, take a close look and let's weigh this against, is this a reasonable approach or is this an extreme approach? Okay, let's dive right into this. There's only 12 of them. One of the questions that has to be asked before supporting a particular piece of policy or legislation, does it create, expand, or enlarge any agency, board, program, function, or activity of government? Why would that matter? Well, because there's always a cost that's associated with any creation, expansion, or enlargement of any agency, board, program, function, or activity of government. Some of those things may be proper. Many of them are not. And conversely, I love that they add this too. Does the policy eliminate or curtail the size or scope of government? Now, for some, that would seem like a terrible thing to do. What? It's not going to tuck our children into bed at night and read them a story? Okay, that's not a proper function of government, however well-intended it may be. Here's a second point. Does it transfer a function of the private sector to the government? Now, examples of this would include government ownership of or control of any providers of goods or services, such as the land board's purchase of a self-storage facility or mandatory emissions testing or pre-kindergarten. Conversely, does it eliminate a function of government or return a function of government to the proper sector or to the private sector? Now, again, this comes down to a matter of there are some things that it is legitimate for government to do. In fact, I'm surprised I can even say this, but it's true. There are some things that good government should do, but those things are very limited. By nature, they have to be limited. And if it's something that can be addressed within the private sector, in other words, if you could open up what we used to call the yellow pages and you could find someone who's doing this work, that's probably your best bet. But you'll still see people trying to mandate, well, no, government should be in competition. They should run this golf course. They should do that. It's a great way to make work. It's a great way to create job security for those who want to work for the state, but it's not always within the boundaries of what's proper for government to be doing in the first place. Number three, does it give government any new, additional, or expanded power to either prohibit, restrict, or regulate activities in the free market? Now, some people have a real aversion to the idea of the free market. They think of it as a free for all where, we get worked to death for a nickel a day. And, those of us who don't die from being overworked by, evil corporate overlords, well, we've been killed by exploding appliances or some other, thing that would happen, except for the benevolent state looking over their shoulder and wagging a finger and making sure that they're doing what they should, which ignores the premise that the free market is based upon, which is it's a voluntary exchange. Government doesn't use voluntary. Government uses force. Perhaps you've noticed this, right? Laws are not written as suggestions. Hey, be nice if you did this or you did that. No, it's backed up with a penalty, and they will send people to enforce it if you're found not to be in compliance. The free market meets people's needs on a voluntary basis. It doesn't force itself. It persuades people to do business with it. So when a policy gives government new, additional, or expanded power to either prohibit, restrict, or regulate activities in the free market, we should make sure that it's a proper function of what government should be doing in the first place. After all, if someone suffers an injury, there are laws that will take care of it. Tort laws will allow you to sue someone who actually causes you harm. And conversely, we ask the question, does a policy eliminate or reduce government intervention in the market? I know people who don't believe in freedom, they quail at the idea of this, but it's actually a very good thing for government to get out of the way. That's how people are able to prosper. Number four, does it increase barriers to entry into the market? Now, this is one of the places where, sadly, the business interests, and I'm talking about the special interests, IACI and some of their cronies, they really like the idea of barriers to entry into the market because it can be used as a way to prevent competitors from gaining a toehold within the market. So a big healthcare provider like St. Luke's can absorb the cost, they can eat the costs of regulation that would kill smaller startup businesses that want to try to make their way in the market. Competition is a good thing. Competition allows the very best to rise to the top. But you don't have a free market when government is intervening and picking winners or choosing winners and losers here and there. So whatever you think we have, we may sometimes refer to it as the free market, but if government's involved, it's not a free market. A free market means government stays out of the way. And conversely, examples, would include occupational licensure, the minimum wage, restrictions on home businesses. We also have to ask, though, does a particular policy remove barriers to entry into the market? This is where the NIMBY idea, not in my backyard, people get upset. Oh, my neighbor wants to operate an Airbnb, and they worry, well, it's going to impact the whole neighborhood. It's going to drive down my property values. And a lot of it's based on fantasy about what might happen as opposed to what actually is happening. For instance, are you actually selling your home? Well, no. Then why are you worried about the value? If you're worried that their neighbor is going to actually cause that harm. Are they actually causing harm? No, but they might. Yes, and if your aunt was plumbed differently, she might be your uncle. I mean, it unfortunately gives politicians a lot of room to work with, but barriers into the market, minimum wage being one of those well-intentioned ones. Just ask anybody who worked in fast food in California. Every time they hike the minimum wage, how many more of those jobs actually go away as opposed to the workers making more? Consequences, right? That which is seen, that which is not seen. Number five, does it directly or indirectly create or increase any taxes, fees, or other assessments? Why does this matter? Because too many people within politics, and sadly, this includes a number of Republicans here in the state of Idaho, they look at taxpayers as kind of an endless open wallet that's there for them to reach into anytime they come up with a good notion of somehow some political blessing that they can bestow upon the taxpayers or the citizens of this state, some of whom are taxpayers, many of whom may not be. Now, conversely, you have to ask the question, does this policy eliminate or reduce taxes, fees, or other assessments? Again, driving down the cost of government is a good thing. The more you pay for government is not proof that government cares more about you. It's just proof that politicians have successfully hoodwinked you into paying for whatever their desires of their hearts are. Number six, does it increase government redistribution of wealth? This is a big one. And in fact, we saw this play out during this last legislative session. Some of the caterwauling over, well, the budget for health and welfare and the summer EBT card program for free lunches for kids. Well, if we aren't providing this, then it's just it's evidence that we hate children. We want them to starve. No, it's not. It's evidence that the federal government will dangle money out there with strings attached, and that well-meaning people will seize it thinking, look at what a good thing I'm doing. Yeah, but you're doing it with other people's money. If it was really such a good thing, you would be ponying up your own money instead of trying to plunder the taxpayers, respectively, through the power of the state. So, use of tax policy or other incentives to reward special interest groups, politicians, businesses, or government employees with special favors or perks, transfer payments, hiring additional government employees. Conversely, we can ask, does a particular policy decrease government redistribution of wealth? If it decreases it, it's probably a good thing. Number 7, does it increase government spending, especially for objectionable purposes? Case in point would be, should the taxpayers be on the hook for every person who has gender dysphoria to pay for or to subsidize their sex change operation? No. That doesn't mean that people don't care. It's just not a proper function of government. If you care that much, dig into your own wallet and show by example that you care enough to donate. Let private charity carry the day. Conversely, we can ask, does a particular policy decrease government spending or debt? Now, how common sense does it have to be for people to say, yeah, that would probably be a good thing? I don't know about you, but I don't know a single person, no matter how well off or how much they may struggle financially, who isn't working a little bit harder, in fact, a lot harder, just to make ends meet. So we can stop looking at the taxpayers as some kind of an endless piggy bank that will always have something to shake out of it. Only the state can use force to shake that money loose from people. Everybody else has to actually earn those donations or earn the purchase that will put money in their pocket. Number 8, does it in any way restrict public access to information related to government activity or otherwise compromise government transparency, accountability, or election integrity? How many things do you like government to do in secret? Just today, the U.S. Congress voted to renew the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act without the requirement for a warrant. They want the FBI to be able to spy on American citizens without having a warrant to do so. Is that good? Does that promote trust and transparency in what government is up to? Will the FBI tell you, well, yeah, this is why we were looking into this person or that person? No, they won't. They hide behind secrecy, and government is no exception to the things that are done in darkness. Usually are not things that it should be doing in the first place. And I know that there's a whole school of thought for the national security state, but all these things have to be done in darkness. I don't think that's worked out so well for any of us. And when it comes to election integrity, holy cow, all you have to do is question, are these things being done in such a way that people can have faith that their elections are being handled fairly and openly? If the answer is no, then don't be surprised when people have questions or people wonder, could that election have been stolen or manipulated or otherwise interfered with? Now, conversely, does a particular policy increase public access to information related to government activity? Does it increase government transparency, accountability, or election integrity? I can't think of a reasonable person who wouldn't say, yes, I want to have more of those things. Only people who have something to hide would be against that. Isn't that funny? The shoes on the other. You have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. Tell that to the person in government who wants to do things in secret. Number 9, does it violate the principle of equal protection under the law? Now, this is a good one. Examples include laws which discriminate or differentiate based on age, gender, or religion, or which apply laws, regulations, rules, or penalties differently based on characteristics. We are all either equal before the law or we're not. And even though people say, well, we'll just expand the list of categories until we include everybody, don't break us up into categories. We are all equal before the law or not. It's only identity politics, which, I'm sorry this has to be pointed out, but that's an ugly form of collectivism. Your worth is determined by what group we can assign you to. No, my worth is determined by the fact that I'm a living, breathing human being with inalienable rights, and government and its power is limited by those rights. Conversely, we have to ask, does a particular policy restore or protect the principle of equal protection under the law? For all the talk you hear about diversity and equity and inclusivity, equality before the law handles all of that. So don't let people try to hoodwink you into thinking that, well, the law doesn't protect us unless we name every single group that we can think of, because there will be an endlessly expanding list of groups which eventually turns into little tribes that squabble and fight with each other for government-granted favors. Number 10, does it directly or indirectly create or increase penalties for victimless crimes or non-restorative penalties for non-violent crimes? I mean, nobody likes to think about this, but let's say you get a ticket for something. Well, your grass was too high, or whatever it may be. How do I make this crime go away? How can I solve the hurt, the harm that's been done? Well, you pay us money, and it'll go away. Hmm. You have to choose carefully, because that's that's a kind of carrot and stick that can be abused at many different levels. Now, again, conversely, does the policy eliminate or decrease penalties for victimless crimes or non-restorative penalties for non-violent crimes? The state can't be the victim, but it often pretends that it is, and only by giving it money can it expiate whatever you stand accused of doing wrong. Number 11, does it violate the spirit or the letter of either the United States Constitution or the Idaho Constitution? Why is this so important? It's because those constitutions represent a contract between the people of the United States and the people of the state of Idaho. It doesn't give the people rights. What it does is call into existence either state government or the federal government in the case of the US Constitution, and explains the upper limits of its powers as well as the functions of those various forms of government. Now, examples of violating the spirit or letter of either the US or Idaho Constitution would be restrictions on speech or public assembly, freedom of the press, privacy, private property, or firearms. Conversely, does it restore or uphold the protections guaranteed in the US Constitution or the Idaho Constitution? I don't know why this is so hard for some people to get their minds around, but the idea here is constitutions define and limit the upper powers of government. They don't give you anything. Your rights are yours by virtue of the fact that you're a living, breathing human being, period. We won't get into the abortion issue on this one, but I know some people would be looking for that loophole. All right, number 12. Does it violate the principles of federalism by increasing federal authority, yielding to federal blandishments, or incorporating changeable federal laws into Idaho statutes or rules? This is something that is not well understood, and I wish that more people could get their minds around this. The federal government was called into existence by a contract consisting of the states and the people who came together and said, this is what we want to do. The states should have most of the say in governance, with just a very few areas in which their collective interests are represented by a federal government. We don't have that anymore. What we have is a national government that dictates to the states, and what it's not dictating, it's enticing through the use of funds that it dangles, again, with strings attached. So examples would include citing federal code without noting it as it is written on a certain date, or using state resources to enforce federal laws, or refusing to support and uphold the 10th Amendment. Conversely, we have to ask, does it restore or uphold the principles of federalism? So those 12 points seem very, very reasonable. There's nothing extreme about them. They're all about keeping government in its lane, keeping it from being used as an instrument of plunder against the people. And that includes all people. Just because, you may be a progressive liberal or a progressive Democrat doesn't mean that, you deserve to be plundered. Neither, though, does it mean that you should be using the apparatus of the state to plunder your Republican neighbors. And here's the problem we face here in Idaho, and that is that there are many legislators who run as Republicans, and they win as Republicans, but they govern as Democrats. Case in point. This is courtesy of Brian Allman from the Gem State Chronicle. Senator Rick Just compared to Senator Linda Hartgen. Linda Hartgen is a Republican. Rick Just is a Democrat. Now, when it comes to the Freedom Index, Rick earns 24.5%. That's well below a failing grade. But look at where Linda Hartgen is on the Freedom Index. She's only, 4.5 points, 5.5 points above him. And yet, year after year, she is sent back to the Idaho Senate by people who think, well, she's a Republican. She's a common sense Republican. Why, she says so herself. But when you hold up her actions against the Freedom Index, look at the spending index. I mean, she's just not doing such a good job. Very good on education, though, which is probably one of the reasons why she keeps being returned to it. So think about this as you go to vote in your primaries, or as you participate in your caucuses, or as you vote in a general election. It's not so much about what name gives me the warmest fuzzies. It's more like who is following the spirit of the law and keeping within the boundaries of what government's proper role is. Because here you have Idahoans looking to pursue life, liberty, and property. And then you have yes men, bureaucrats, and big government who say, well, I'm a conservative Republican and therefore you can trust me. But they're taking all of those things away by the way that they govern. Look, you don't have to be a John Bircher to understand the importance of limited government. It prevents you from being plundered just as it protects your neighbor. And the idea here is that we're all being treated equally and not hoping that we can plunder this group or plunder that group. But you sure see a lot of lobbying along those lines, and it's not consistent with good government. And frankly, people are catching on to it, which is one of the reasons why we're seeing such a push for ranked choice voting, or the idea that we can monkey with the system and make it confusing enough to tamper with the results and work it in some way that the person you voted for has no chance, but somebody who was way down on the ballot somehow finds their way into the winner's circle. That's sophistry combined with electoral politics. It's also the same way with the idea of open primaries. The only way we can be fair is let people into the Republican primary who want to water down the Republican platform and vote against everything that it supposedly stands for. I don't know why that makes sense to some people, but apparently it does. Not to me, and hopefully it doesn't to you. So thanks to the Idaho Freedom Foundation for their Freedom Index. Not everybody agrees with it, and perhaps you don't agree with it, but at least you have a little bit better understanding of some of the things that need to be considered and why it's just not a good idea to just hand that blank check to people in government and trust they're going to do the right thing. Their actions tell the tale, and the Freedom Index gives you a very good yardstick to tell whether their actions match up with their rhetoric. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Bias, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see.
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how